I was nervous around her, and when she laughed, "You're nervous? That makes you even cuter." My heart forgot how to behave. I had always thought visiting my friend's house would be simple, a few hours of games, snacks, and idle chatter. But the moment I stepped inside, something shifted. The air felt warmer, almost electric, like the house itself had decided to notice me. She was there, leaning slightly against the kitchen counter, a cup of tea in her hands, and I froze. She was my friend's mom, but it didn't feel like a simple parental figure. She had this effortless grace, the kind that doesn't demand attention but somehow draws it anyway. Her hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, creating a soft halo around her face. I tried to greet her casually, but my voice betrayed me, a little too high, a little too hesitant. She laughed, lightly, the sound clear and genuine, and it hit me in a way that made my stomach flip. "Hey," she said, tilting her head with a small, playful smile. Her eyes, warm and knowing, studied me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I felt exposed under her gaze, yet strangely seen. There was a calm confidence about her, the kind that made me aware of every tiny movement I made, from the way I shifted my weight to the nervous tangle of my fingers. I stumbled over my words, offering some awkward small talk about the weather or school or whatever came to mind, and she chuckled softly, shaking her head in amusement. "You're nervous, aren't you?" she teased, and I flushed before I could even think of a reply. That simple observation, delivered with warmth rather than judgment, made my heart race. Somehow, being caught off guard by her attention felt thrilling instead of mortifying. Even in that brief first interaction, I noticed the little things that made her presence so magnetic. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral, yet understated, wrapped around me, mingling with the smell of warm bread from the kitchen. Her fingers, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, moved with such unstudied elegance that I couldn't look away. I wanted to memorize every detail, though I knew I had no right to linger so obviously. The moment stretched longer than it should have, an unspoken tension weaving itself into the mundane rhythm of the afternoon. My nerves battled with curiosity, respect battled with desire. I reminded myself that she was my friend's mother, that this was ordinary and innocent. And yet, the quiet thrill of that first encounter, her laughter, the warmth in her eyes, the subtle gravity of her presence, anchored itself somewhere deep in my chest. By the time my friend called me into the living room, I was both exhilarated and unsettled, caught between embarrassment and fascination. I had come to hang out with a friend, but somehow, I left the kitchen feeling like I had met someone who could turn my world upside down, gently, quietly, and entirely without warning. The next time I visited my friend's house, the nervous knot in my stomach was still there, but it had shifted into something else, a quiet anticipation I couldn't quite name. My friend went off to his room, leaving me in the kitchen with her. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, dust motes floating lazily in the warm light, and I realized I was hyper-aware of every small detail. She was pouring herself some tea, humming softly, and even that simple act seemed somehow mesmerizing. I tried to start a casual conversation about a school project, but my words felt clumsy. She laughed again, not mocking, just genuinely amused, and my face burned. There was a lightness in the way she moved, the gentle tilt of her head, the warmth in her smile that made me feel both seen and small at the same time. "What's got you fidgeting so much?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, one eyebrow raised in playful curiosity. Her voice was soft, melodic, and it caught me off guard. I laughed nervously, scratching the back of my neck, realizing she had noticed every twitch, every hesitation. We ended up sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table. She slid a plate of cookies toward me, and our fingers brushed briefly. It was such a fleeting touch, just the tips of our fingers meeting, yet I felt a jolt run through me, like static electricity. The room seemed smaller, warmer, more intimate than it had before, and I suddenly became acutely aware of her presence, the subtle scent of her perfume, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders as she laughed at something I said, the soft way her eyes lingered on me when I thought she was looking past me. She shared small anecdotes about her day, nothing extraordinary, but the way she spoke made me feel like I was part of her world, a confidant in a quiet moment. I found myself leaning in slightly, not realizing how much I wanted to hear every word, see every expression. Her hand brushed against mine once more as she reached for her cup, and I quickly pulled back, embarrassed, though my chest still thumped. The conversation flowed effortlessly, but beneath it, there was this unspoken tension, subtle and insistent. Every glance held a little more warmth, every laugh a little more softness, every gesture a touch more intimate than socially necessary. I reminded myself to stay composed. After all, she was my friend's mom, yet my mind betrayed me, dwelling on the way her presence made the air feel charged, how her simple amusement could make me both nervous and alive. By the time my friend returned, I realized that I had been holding my breath for most of our conversation. She waved at me with a gentle, knowing smile, and I felt a strange mixture of longing and guilt. The subtle tension between us had grown, unspoken and delicate, like a thread stretching taut in a quiet room. And yet, despite my racing heart and clumsy thoughts, I couldn't help but look forward to the next time I would see her, the next casual conversation that promised that same quiet thrill. It was one of those rare afternoons when the house felt empty, quiet in a way that made every sound more intimate. My friend had left for a quick errand, leaving me alone with his mom in the living room. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting warm patterns across the carpet, and I suddenly realized how aware I was of her presence. Every small movement she made seemed amplified, the soft way she adjusted a cushion, the gentle clink of her teacup against the saucer, the subtle shift in her posture as she looked at me. We ended up sitting side by side on the couch while I tried to help her with a minor task, organizing some books she had been sorting. I reached for a stack, and she leaned slightly toward me, her hand brushing mine in the process. It was such a fleeting contact, just the slightest touch, yet the warmth of her skin sent an unexpected thrill through me. I felt my heartbeat speed up, a quiet rush that left me both exhilarated and self-conscious. She noticed, of course. Her eyes met mine, calm yet knowingly playful, and I felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and comfort. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a gentle curiosity that made me want to stay in that moment forever. "Careful," she said softly, her voice carrying that melodic warmth that seemed to wrap around me like a blanket. "You're handling these like they're fragile, and maybe you are." Her smile lingered, the kind that felt like an invitation without saying a word. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, a subtle floral that mixed with the faint scent of books and sunlight. It was intoxicating in the quietest way, grounding me while simultaneously making me dizzy with awareness of her presence. I found myself leaning just slightly closer, drawn to the rhythm of her movements, the soft cadence of her voice, the reassuring steadiness she seemed to radiate. She shared a small, personal anecdote, something about her childhood, a fleeting memory, and I listened intently, hanging on every word. Her story revealed a side of her I hadn't noticed before, vulnerability tucked beneath confidence, a gentle honesty that made her feel human and relatable, not just captivating. As I nodded and murmured responses, our shoulders brushed lightly, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. Every subtle gesture, the way she shifted closer to hand me a book, the warmth of her gaze, the slight touch of her fingertips against mine, created a quiet tension that was thrilling without being inappropriate. I was painfully aware of the closeness, of the small electric moments that seemed to pulse between us, yet there was also a safety in it, a deep comfort that made my nerves settle just enough for me to enjoy the sensation. By the time my friend returned, the moment had passed, but the memory lingered. My chest still carried the echo of her warmth, my mind replayed her laughter and the gentle pressure of her touch. Something had shifted in me, a realization that my fascination with her was more than curiosity, more than admiration. It was a quiet, slow-burning connection, one that tugged at my heart without words, leaving me both exhilarated and unsettled, desperate for the next private moment, the next heartbeat connection that promised something unspoken yet profoundly significant. That afternoon, I felt the familiar swirl of nerves the moment I stepped into the living room. My friend was lounging on the couch, absorbed in his phone, leaving me alone with his mom once again. The sunlight streamed through the windows, brushing her hair with golden highlights, and I found myself nervously fumbling with the strap of my backpack. Every small sound in the room, the soft creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, seemed magnified in my awareness, as if the world itself had narrowed to just her presence. She noticed immediately. Her eyes sparkled with amusement as she watched me struggle to compose myself. "You're fidgeting again," she said softly, tilting her head with a teasing smile. The warmth in her voice made my chest tighten, a mix of embarrassment and exhilaration coursing through me. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something about being clumsy, but my words felt awkward and unconvincing. "That nervous, huh?" she continued, stepping closer under the pretense of adjusting a pillow on the couch. Her hand brushed mine lightly, accidental, she claimed, yet the lingering warmth of her skin sent an unmistakable jolt through me. My pulse quickened, and I struggled to hide the sudden awareness of her closeness. She smiled knowingly, and it was then that she dropped the line that would stick in my mind forever: "You're nervous? That makes you even cuter." The words hung in the air, soft and teasing, yet heavy with an unspoken intimacy. My cheeks flushed, heat creeping up my neck as I avoided her gaze, pretending to focus on something else entirely. But her presence pressed gently against my awareness, impossible to ignore. She leaned just slightly toward me, the faint scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a comforting, dangerous cloud, and I realized I couldn't breathe normally, couldn't think clearly, couldn't stop noticing the way her eyes held mine with quiet amusement. She laughed softly, a gentle, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. My nerves, once a chaotic storm, settled into a tingling anticipation. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the brief brush of her fingers against mine, felt loaded with unspoken meaning. It was playful, teasing, yet profoundly intimate in a way that made my heart ache and skip simultaneously. I wanted to say something clever, to hide my embarrassment with humor, but my voice faltered. Instead, I just smiled awkwardly, hoping she would sense the sincerity beneath my flustered exterior. She leaned back slightly, giving me space, yet the warmth lingered, in the room, in my chest, in the slow, electric awareness of her presence. That small moment, her teasing words, and the gentle, lingering touches transformed an ordinary afternoon into something extraordinary. It was a delicate dance of emotions, embarrassment tangled with desire, respect mixed with curiosity, and an undeniable tension simmering just beneath the surface. I left that encounter acutely aware of how magnetic she was, and how completely unprepared I was to navigate the feelings she had quietly awakened in me. That evening, the house had grown quiet. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving me alone in the living room with his mom. The soft glow of a single lamp cast warm pools of light across the room, highlighting the delicate curve of her features and the gentle way she moved. There was a calmness to the space that made the usual nerves I carried around her settle into a quiet anticipation. I didn't know why, but being alone with her in this gentle light felt like stepping into another world, one where time slowed, and ordinary gestures gained weight. We ended up sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over our laps after she had offered it with a soft, "It's a little chilly tonight." I felt a strange comfort in the gesture, the warmth of the fabric brushing against my legs and mingling with the subtle heat radiating from her side. She began to speak about her day, not the superficial details, but the quiet, small moments, a fleeting disappointment at work, a thoughtful interaction with a neighbor, the relief of finally finishing a book she had been reading. Her voice was soft but rich, carrying a depth that made me lean in without realizing it. I listened, captivated, noticing how the corners of her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the faint tension in her shoulders when she recalled a worry, the way her hand lingered near mine on the blanket without quite touching it. The room was silent except for her words, and yet it felt full of unspoken understanding, full of subtle tension, full of a quiet intimacy that was impossible to ignore. At one point, she shared a personal story from her past, something tender and vulnerable about a loss she had experienced. I felt my chest tighten, my heart aching slightly with the weight of her honesty. I wanted to comfort her, to reach out and bridge the distance between us, but I hesitated, aware of boundaries yet drawn irresistibly toward her. Her gaze met mine, calm and steady, and I realized she was allowing me in, letting me see the layers beneath her composed exterior. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the cool night air drifting in from an open window, a subtle, intoxicating reminder of her presence. My fingers brushed against hers as I reached for my water glass, and this time, the contact was longer, warmer, deliberate only in its fleeting gentleness. A small jolt ran through me, a mixture of comfort and desire, and I quickly looked away, feeling my pulse racing. By the end of the evening, I understood that our connection had deepened far beyond teasing smiles or accidental touches. There was trust, a sense of emotional safety, and a profound awareness of each other's presence. I left that night with a quiet ache, a longing to hear her voice again, to feel the warmth of those late-night moments, and a slow, steady realization, this connection was no longer simple curiosity. It was something more, something meaningful, tender, and entirely impossible to ignore. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon, and I had come over to hang out with my friend again. The house was alive with the soft sounds of daily life, a distant hum of traffic outside, the occasional creak of floorboards, and the faint rustle of pages as she rearranged a few magazines on the coffee table. I had grown accustomed to being around her, yet something about today made me acutely aware of every subtle movement, every glance, every brush of air that hinted at her presence. We were in the kitchen, helping with some small chores. I reached for a jar on the counter, and she was there, moving alongside me. Our hands brushed as she handed it to me, a fleeting contact that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. I felt a spark, a quiet jolt that made my chest tighten and my pulse quicken. I wanted to pull away, to behave normally, but a part of me hesitated, captivated by the warmth of her hand against mine. She caught my gaze with a soft, knowing smile, tilting her head ever so slightly. There was a playfulness in her expression, a silent acknowledgement of the tension I was trying desperately to hide. Her laughter followed soon after, light and melodic, as if she could sense the storm of emotions I was suppressing. I realized in that instant that every small gesture, every subtle smile, was intentional, or at least, it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Later, we moved to the living room, sitting side by side on the couch while my friend went off to grab something. The proximity was impossible to ignore. Our knees brushed lightly, our shoulders nearly touched, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her side. Each small movement she made, reaching for a cushion, leaning slightly to adjust the lamp, seemed magnified in my awareness. My heartbeat thumped audibly in my ears, each pulse echoing the desire and nervousness coiling in my chest. She spoke casually about something mundane, a recipe she wanted to try or a funny incident from earlier in the week, yet her voice carried a softness that made my attention cling to every word. I caught myself staring at her, noticing the gentle curve of her jaw, the subtle sparkle in her eyes, the delicate way her fingers brushed against the couch fabric. When she laughed softly, I felt a pull in my chest, a mix of longing and admiration that made it impossible to focus on anything else. At one point, she reached to hand me a small object, a pen I had dropped, and our fingers met again. This time, the touch lingered longer, almost deliberately, and I felt the warmth and weight of her presence in a way that left me dizzy and exhilarated all at once. There was no urgency, no inappropriate intent, just a quiet, slow-building intimacy that stretched the moment into something electric. By the time my friend returned, the air between us felt charged, heavy with tension and unspoken acknowledgement. I left that afternoon with a heightened awareness of her every gesture, every glance, and every subtle smile. The connection had deepened, and the slow burn that had been growing steadily over weeks now roared quietly in my chest, thrilling, impossible to ignore, and entirely unspoken. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm. My friend was upstairs, probably lost in a video game or chatting with someone online, and I found myself lingering in the living room with his mom once again. The soft glow of the lamp cast a warm, golden light across her features, and I realized how much I had come to anticipate these quiet, unremarkable moments, because in them, everything felt extraordinary. We were sitting near the window, the world outside dark and still, the occasional distant car hum mingling with the faint rustle of leaves. I watched her as she sipped her tea, her fingers curling delicately around the cup, and felt a familiar jolt of awareness. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was a deep appreciation for her presence, for the way she could make ordinary moments feel so intimate and significant. She noticed my gaze and smiled softly, a subtle curve of her lips that made my chest tighten. "Long day?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost conspiratorial in its warmth. I nodded, realizing I wanted to linger here, to sit quietly with her and let the world shrink down to just this room, just this connection. As I rose to leave, she stood as well, walking me to the door. There was a natural ease in her movements, a graceful confidence that seemed to envelope me without effort. Her hand brushed my shoulder lightly as she opened the door, the contact fleeting but lingering in my mind, sending a small, familiar spark through me. I felt an urge to say something, anything, that would capture the way her presence had subtly, completely taken hold of me. But words failed, as they often did, leaving only the warmth of her smile and the echo of her laughter. "You'll come by again soon, right?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, that same playful, knowing look she always gave me. I nodded, a quiet thrill running through me, grateful for the permission embedded in that simple question. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a mutual understanding of the connection we had built, slow, steady, and entirely ours in its quiet intimacy. As I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin, I realized how profoundly this day, and so many days before, had affected me. Her presence, her gentle teasing, the warmth of her touch and laughter, had become a part of my rhythm, a heartbeat I carried even when I was away. I smiled to myself, feeling a mixture of contentment, longing, and anticipation. This wasn't a love story shouted from rooftops, it was a slow, careful weaving of trust, warmth, and subtle desire that lingered in every glance, every gesture, every moment we shared. Looking back toward the house one last time, I caught her at the doorway, her eyes meeting mine. She gave me a soft wave, a small, intimate gesture that made my chest ache in the best way possible. The quiet intimacy, the playful teasing, the lingering touches, all of it had built to this moment, a warm, satisfying closure that left me exhilarated and hopeful, knowing that this connection, delicate and profound, would continue to grow with each new visit. The door closed gently behind me, but the memory of her warmth, her laughter, and that slow, steady pulse of connection stayed with me. And in that lingering moment, I realized that the story wasn't about dramatic confessions or sudden gestures, it was about the quiet, unspoken intimacy that had quietly taken over my heart, leaving me utterly captivated, entirely content, and eagerly anticipating what came next. If you felt the flutter of their quiet connection, hit the like button and share this story with someone who loves slow burn romance. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming age gap love stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of emotional tension and heartfelt moments.